Hey people, I got another do-it-yourself video here. This is going to be for a little higher skill. My buddy at Exclusive Auto Brokers over here, I put an addition on his building back here a couple years ago. And he wants a 24 by 40 addition out here right behind this truck. There's a couple front doors into his car dealership. So I went out there yesterday and I seen at the front page of the prints, they were kind of roughed up. I did all those numbers on there, taking some dimensions, and they was roughed up a little bit. Then I looked at the next couple pages and I seen they were kind of pristine. I didn't see any fingerprints on them. So I figured the anchor bolts are probably going to be wrong. So I went and measured all the steel, the anchor plates and the top plates of the steel, and got some dimensions on it. And I measured the rafters and got some dimensions on here. And I measured the concrete and the bolts. I was pouring down sweat. My plans was soaking wet from it. I couldn't hardly write no more, so I took it home with me and figured on a little bit. But I was pretty sure that the bolts was off before I left. So it looks like this. This is outside toward where I was taking a picture of, and this is up against the building here. You can see it is, say, the high eave over here. And I went out there this morning, and it's got 6 sets of columns. It's got 3, it's freestanding, and 3 in the front. And so it'll have 3 rafters across here. So I brought me some help today, and I went and eyeballed between these center columns and pulled a string, and then I pulled these dimensions off the 2 sides of it, 1911 13/16, and got me a mark. And then I did the same thing on the bottom. I just put my string between the set of bolts that was there in the middle, and I've got this measurement off both sides. Was it like 18 10 and 13/16, and they're different, a little inch difference there. And I measured off, and so I popped a line on both sides. And then I took these dimensions off of here, 1'4" and 3/8. And this is telling me this dimension's coming from the wall out here. And it's telling me it goes out to these set of bolts, the center of these bolts. And I took the long dimension, this between here, this is telling me it's 21'3" and 3/8 between the center of these inside bolts and the bolts on the other end here. And this little arrow here and this dimension telling me this should be 1'4" and 1/4 from the outside of the slab to the center line of these bolts. So this is the most important measurement, the measurement between these 2 sets of bolts, because it bolts up to the rafter, all the weight's on that, and the bolts aren't holding the rafter up. The bolts are holding friction against the column, and the friction's holding the rafter up, so they've got to fit up flush. This distance between the bottom of the columns has got to be correct in order to get the rafter to seal up, to have friction against the columns. You can't have them spread out. So that's the most important dimension. And so after getting all the measurements, I laid out where all the bolts should be. And I got the dimensions off the plans on the 3rd page back. It's got a plan with this bolt pattern for the anchor bolts. This is what the base plate on the column looks like. And they're all different. They're 2.5 inches from the center line that I popped. So there'll be 2.5 inches of each side, 5 inches apart, and 4 5/8 this distance here. And you can see the dotted line here. This is where the I-beam sits and is welded to the plate. And so you really can't have bolts here because you can't get a wrench. The bolt's got to be out somewhere in this area here. I could slot the holes and move them sometime. And so they were all different. The center column is thicker. It's holding the twice the weight as the 2 outside are. And so it's a little thicker. It has a little different bolt pattern. It's a wider beam. See these bolt details, they have a letter on here. This detail A, detail B, detail C, and detail D. So that's going to be, 4 different bolt patterns, and you'll have 2 of them for the center columns, and then 2 of them for the 2 outside that's up against the building, and 2 of them on this one. And you see it here, where the bolt plan goes. It'll have a C. It lets me know that this is going to be a C plan, a C bolt plan. This is going to be a D bolt plan. This is going to be a C bolt plan. And this will be the A bolt plan on the corners, a B bolt plan, and then an A, so there's 4 different ways to do it, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they give me 4 different details, and there'll be something different in each one. You can see how these A columns on the corners are just 8-inch wide here. And this B is a center column, it's a 10-inch wide. This C, the outside on the west end. And so these two that, there's got 5.5 inches between this set of bolts, and 5 5/8, that's my center columns, and 4.5 patterns, 4 5/8 on my outer columns. And so I took these dimensions and went and laid out all the bolts, and they look like this. This is where they should be, where these circles and X's are. And this is what the man left me. And so, this plate is here. And so this is almost in the center of the beam. This one's, I could make this one work. I'm going to put a pipe on it, slot the washer. But these other 3 I got to cut off. And I got to re-drill 2 over here. I might be able to use 3 here. And this is the other corner. That was the northeast, and this is the northwest. And then the southwest wasn't no better. I might be able to put this 1 bolt in the center of that pattern. The rest of these bolts got to be cut off. And then after I laid them all out, I went and got one of the steel purlins that belongs here, and I went and laid it to the middle. It kind of looks like this. This is the 4 corners and 40 foot between here. And I don't have the picture of the center columns, but I pulled from the center of them, so they're lined up this way, but they're still off the same as the others, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And so I laid this steel beam to the center column, and I lined these holes up that's at the other end, with the holes on the center column. And that helps me check my work. Even if I didn't know how to read a tape measure, I could still set the bolt right, just using the steel, if you know how the steel goes together. But yeah, that tells me that my numbers is right and his was wrong. It's a real good idea to get your anchor bolts in the right place. This is the worst I've ever seen. Usually I can hammer them on there and maybe have to cut a slot in one of them. This is the worst I've ever seen them. So if this is your first time and you ordered a building, read the first page. Read all this information. If you're putting the bolts in, if you're putting the slab in, read this information on the first page. Otherwise, you're going to have to do like I did and take dimensions of all the steel and have some understanding of how the building goes together in order to get your bolts right. But there used to be mistakes back in the day when it was man-made, when man made the drawings, and they were a lot bigger. It was a lot easier to see them back then. But they used to make mistakes sometimes, so you would have to measure the steel like I did and go off the steel. And that's what I did. I checked all the steel to make sure that all the dimensions are right. Even though it's machines that do it now, once in a while there is a mistake. But yeah, most of the time the machines are correct. And so you're going to need to understand all these dimensions, what this means on this first page. You have to understand what the steel line is when it says this is the high eave side, this is up against the building. And so anytime they take dimensions for this, they're taking dimensions off the steel line. And so the existing building has high ribs, but the steel line is here where this screw screwed this steel in. You don't measure off the high rib, that's the steel line back here. So it's 1'4" 3/8 from that steel line out to this set of bolts. And all these measurements will be center line the bolts, or center line the web. And so that 1'4" 3/8 is here. It's just 8 1/4 from the steel line to the edge of the beam, and then 3 1/2 to the first set of holes, and then 4 5/8 to the next set of holes. 8 1/4, 9, 10, 11 3/4, and 16 3/8. 1 4 3/8 from the steel line to the set of holes. Usually your concrete and bolt plan will come from your local code office, and he'll take and look at this page, and he knows how deep your footing's got to be and what size bolts, how long your bolts have got to be. But study that, make sure you got that all figured out, all these dimensions here. And he figured all that out by reading the third page here. It tells what the code is on the building. Going to tell you how many bolts you got to have and what size. And it'll tell you down here in the summary, how many the total and how much you're going to let them project out. And then study the detail plan and just know that for every detail, that's how many different measurements you're going to need. Usually all the bolts will be the same, and we'll take a bunch of boards and cut them and drill them and nail them up to the forms to make sure the bolts stay in place, in the right place. And you can do the same thing here, you just got to make every one of them different. And it's got to be right. There's existing building here where this is bolted up, and the top of it protrudes over with this eave strut that fits right up against the existing building. They got it figured up for a 1/2 inch space. So I got to pull the existing gutter off, and this new roof is going to fit right up to the existing. So there is no play, the bolts have to be right. If you just stab that column on those bolts, this is going to have to lean out in order to make this clear. And that's going to leave a crack here where this rafter meets up. This is where it's got to be. The bolts are here holding this friction between these two thick plates on this column and this rafter. And so that would give me a crack here. And the same thing on this side. If I was to bolt this on their existing holes, it would be leaning. The bottom would come in, this would be leaning. I wouldn't be able to get that friction between those plates. So I sent these pictures to the concrete man and to the owner. And nobody wants to make a decision. They're waiting on me. And so, it's kind of tough when the way the old bolts are here and where they need to go at, and drilling new bolts in being a problem. And so it's kind of a toss-up between, cutting bolts and drilling and cutting holes and having 3 bolts instead of 4. And then the middle column is a problem too. It's shifted up. They're not lined up. So it's a toss-up between that, or I could set these columns on these bolts. It appears like I could just cut these 2 off and line these 2 up and drill a couple more holes here. And then I would have to cut the tail off of this extension that comes off of this column and slide this eave strut in however much. I have to adjust the column back to fit the bolts. And then everything in the middle would bolt up, and I would just have to put a new set of holes in all my purlins to bolt my purlins up. On the outside of all the purlins, I have to re-drill them, cut holes. So it's a toss-up. So I went to the Mexican joint and drank me a big margarita and a beer and come home and cried in my ice cream. And I'll show up tomorrow morning and maybe somebody made a decision. And if not, I'm going to make it myself, and I'll start cutting and modifying and getting the building ready to go. And I'm going to try to put it all up this weekend when after he closes for business Saturday. I'll try to get all the building up Saturday and Sunday while nobody's there. And so this is part 1. Maybe I'll get some steel going on in the next one. I'll get all the steel prepped and get it going up. Or it might just be a short one with me prepping the steel and getting it ready to go up. Or prepping bolts and drilling new bolts. We'll see how it goes, but it's going to be in several parts here.
Don't forget, hooty hoot, hooty hoot. I won't forget.
Alright, I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.